So if I could ask Senator Uyghur and Representative Prisha to go to the front, is Commissioner Cassellius here? If the commissioner could join them, and Representative and Senator, I don't know if you would like staff to join you or not. We'll see how this works. So what we have in front of us, and I'm just seeing some of this for the first time. We've got the bill summary. We have the special session agreement, proposed agreement. We have the levy spreadsheet. We have the tracking spreadsheet, and we have the proposed bill itself. And again, I believe everything has been posted. So who would like to start? Senator Uyghur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Representative Krisha and I are going to give a 1 or 2 minute overview, and then we'll yield to the commissioner and to staff for additional insight. Overall, the bill has now increased in the special session agreement by $125 million. It now makes it one of the largest investments in Minnesota history for education. It's, I believe, the third or fourth largest over a biennium. There are 11 areas that the additional funds went into. Half, slightly over half, went to the formula. The formula now would be at 2 and 2% each year, and that's about $236 per student. The rest of the money is primarily targeted for students at risk with the intent of closing the achievement gap. You do have a printout showing where that would go. For example, early learning scholarships at $17.5 million additional dollars, making it nearly, in fact, it's over $100 million for the biennium on learning scholarships. The other area, the Indian Education Formula Aid, that's increased by over $9 million. We've gone from a grant program to a formula. Head Start increased by $10 million. Compensatory pilot grants, several districts have participated in this, notably Anoka Hennepin. They've had results showing how they've closed the gap. And this is going to be a decade for this pilot, and hopefully we'll get some permanency, but that's included. The tribal contract schools, English language learners, 6 years we've had funding. Now it goes to 7, again on this theme of closing the achievement gap. Promise neighborhoods for Minneapolis and St. Paul, $2 million apiece. Additionally, for outstate, under education partnerships, there's $1 million, and it's like the Promise program, and this would be allocated to Northfield, Red Wing, and St. Cloud. And finally, there's a provision for the Owatonna referendum for $295,000 due to some miscalculation and regarding changes. The Owatonna was put at risk financially, and this corrects that situation. So that would be the overview of the 11 fiscal items that are included for the additional $125 million. Now, yield to Representative Prisha.
Thank you, Senator.
Representative Prisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll echo largely what Senator Uyghur has said. In a bipartisan fashion, the kids win out, as well as the parents. And I know there's been lots of discussion on how the best delivery method is, but the reality is what we've done here is we've taken some step forwards to make sure that the achievement gap is front and center, as well as targeting the kids that really make up a lot of that achievement gap as they move through. I know that Commissioner Cassellius has done tremendous amount of work and passion hearing her through committee negotiations on the youth. And while we may not have complete agreement on how that delivery mechanism should be in place, what we do have here is a foundation for targeting those students. And I won't go through the changes. Senator Uyghur highlighted those, other than to say that the bill that passed through the House and the Senate is unchanged, with a couple small policy provisions, technical fixes. And other than that, it's just been additions to that, the 11 fiscal items. And I guess the best summation is that that $400 million bill that passed has now just gotten better by $125 more million with the 11 fiscal items that were added. The good thing I think about this is not only is it the young kids that we've approached and targeted, But with the formula increase to 2 and 2, all schools across the state of Minnesota will now continue to see increases, and it's a very good bill coming forward with a bipartisan fashion. And Senator, Commissioner Cassellius.
I think before the commissioner offers some testimony, I think Representative Garofalo, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can allow the commissioner to testify, and I'll ask my question.
Okay, fine. Commissioner.
I'll be brief. Mr. Chair, Senator Uyghur, Representative Krisha, thank you so much for coming together in a bipartisan way. I'd like to thank the legislative leaders, the governor, for standing up for kids in Minnesota, making sure that we do have a strong focus on our most vulnerable kids. When the governor vetoed the first bill, absent were some of those students, and so this bill is better. With the addition of EL students, with the addition of our poorest students in Head Start and early learning, and with the addition of Indian education, and really fully funding Indian education. As you know, 50% of our Indian students graduate, and we have the worst achievement gap for Indian students in the nation. And I'm so glad that we were able to resolve these matters and finally invest in an invisible and sometimes forgotten population of students who deserve our attention. As you know, we convened the 11 tribal leaders earlier this year to really have historic consultation with them about addressing the needs of their children. And so this is a huge accomplishment, and I'm just so thankful the bipartisan agreement coming forward to support American Indian education. Our students who have yet to speak English proficiently, master the language, and have the kind of supports that research says that they need in the year-long additional year, the 7th year, to support them is very important. We heard from superintendents across the state saying they needed enough money on the bottom line so they didn't do layoffs. As you know, Governor Dayton was out there strongly saying we need 2%. This was a non-negotiable for him, and he wanted to be sure that he was funding the bottom line so we could pay our bills and keep our great teachers and make sure they had the support to actually close the achievement gaps in their schools. So it is a much better bill now, and I am thankful for everybody coming together, the hard work of the governor's staff, the hard work of the leadership on the House side and the Senate side to be sure that these matters are resolved. As many of you know, we gave up a big concession. The governor gave up his #1 priority of universal pre-K. But we were also able to address the needs of some of our poorest kids with Head Start and with some additional money in our scholarship program, which the governor has always supported. And so we are very thankful to be able to take a big step forward with early learning, and hopefully we can come back to it in future sessions in a bipartisan way to support every single 4-year-old. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And unfortunately, in our spreadsheets here, we're looking at 16 and 17. We're not having the opportunity to see the 14-15 budget, at least in the numbers I'm looking at. I'm wondering if House Research or nonpartisan staff could tell us how much the total education budget, the education entitlement budget amount is going up between the current biennium and the upcoming biennium. If, again, using the entitlement number, 'cause that's really the accurate number. How much is that going up from the state's perspective in the current biennium compared to the next one?
Okay, is there somebody who would like to, Mr. Willms?
Here, Brenda.
Mr. Chair and committee members, from the spreadsheets that were passed out, you can see the appropriations tracker. These are based on appropriations. To get the actual entitlement number, I would need to look into my spreadsheet, which has those. But roughly, if you, I guess it would depend on if you're looking at the House tracking or the Senate tracking, but you can see it in line 220 of the Senate tracking, or if it's the House tracking. I guess, yeah, House tracking doesn't show the first biennium, but I'll have to look at that and get back to you on that.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, could we ask not Senate staff to see if they could provide us that number for the?
Yeah, so if it's possible to spend a couple of minutes and have the answer for Representative Garofalo, we'd appreciate that. Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Cassellius, just wanted to enlighten you also, if you didn't know, but in the legacy bill regarding Indian education, there's also $3.5 million for language immersion programs. And hopefully that will also help with the achievement gap. And then, if I may continue, Representative Krisha, I believe that there's a provision on allowing for staff development usage in mentorship in this bill. I haven't found that provision yet. Is that in here?
What is it for?
1 second on that.
Is that teacher mentorship?
Did it?
Yes.
I believe that's in there. The teacher mentorship is in there, Representative Urdahl, and then also your other provision about the year-long student teaching is in the bill.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I might continue quickly. Commissioner Cassellius also then, I would just highlight for next year or the future, as I recall, in the bill, it does say that mentorship may utilize staff development, and it emphasizes the importance of mentorship. But what is missing is the component which provides for some training for mentors, so that teachers actually know what to train teachers to do. And I did have a provision, I think, that would be helpful to do that, and let's work on that more next year.
Commissioner?
Representative Urdahl, those are really good suggestions. Also, we do have that provision within the uses of QCOM funding now, and also the district through its regional centers, which weren't funded to be able to expand out, but within our priority and focus schools, our current funding, we're able to provide support and training to mentors through our regional centers for priority and focus schools only. Hopefully, in the future, we can work together to be able to expand those services to more schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Willms?
Mr. Chair and Representative, the change in entitlement is between fiscal 14 and the fiscal 14-15 biennium and fiscal 16-17 biennium is $581 million. And then if you look at the spreadsheet between this biennium and next biennium on the appropriations, you'll see it's $881 million over the next biennium.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Garofalo?
So, Mr. Chairman, and to testifier, so then we combine those two numbers together, and the entitlement is going up by $1.4 billion for this session, upcoming session?
Mr. Chair and committee and representative, so in the first biennium, the number I gave you is $581 million for that first biennium, and then, of course, budgeting into the tails, if you're taking the two bienniums together, then it would be a combination of those two, correct?
Okay, so Mr. Chairman and members, I just want people to be aware that we are putting over $1.4 billion more into education funding. This is a colossal and massive amount of money to be spending in our system, and despite the fact that we're putting all that money into it, they're only getting 2 and 2 on the formula. And the reason why is that previous policymakers made the decision to promise money to other things within education besides the per pupil funding formula. And so as things are happening this fall, and there's the litany of people complaining about a lack of funding, I do think it's important to recognize over $1.4 billion in more spending for K-12, and I suspect that we're going to hear pretty soon that that's not enough, and we're going to need to spend even more. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sieben?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this question is for the Commissioner. Commissioner Cassellius, thank you for your work on this conference committee report. One shortcoming that I'm aware of and I'd like you to speak to is the quality standards that were not adopted for school readiness language. The districts that I represent provide options for parents to send their children to 4-year-old preschool within the school district. I saw the kids get off the bus earlier today on a half-day program, for instance, in my neighborhood. And our district has adopted policies where they have licensed teachers in the classroom, where the students are required to attend certain number of hours per week, where there's a set teacher to child ratio. And I think that those programmatic goals are really important to increasing the quality of school readiness. And I know that, because I've heard you speak about this, Commissioner, that you feel passionate about that. And I was wondering if you could please comment on that And although certainly it's a good thing that there's more money for school readiness contained in the original $400 million bill, I'm very disappointed that there's not additional money for school readiness in the additional money that was allocated, and especially that those quality indicators were not included. If you could please comment on that.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Sieben, I want to thank you for that. It was disappointing not to be able to raise the level of rigor and quality within our school readiness program. Some of our programs do just a wonderful job, so I don't want to discount the fact that many of our schools and community ed partners within schools do a wonderful job of preparing students for kindergarten. However, much of that preparedness is because they've added the quality and they've taken from other funds. Either they've raised a referendum, they have taken Title I funding, or they've taken compensatory funding or their integration funding and put that toward their school readiness funding because it had only been at $10 million. And that they kind of knit those funding together. And then districts that didn't have that additional funding that came for students who are poor, where those additional dollars come from, they then would just charge parents fees. And as you know, Minnesota has the third largest cost for childcare across the nation. So it allowed for, most districts have to charge parent fees. One of the other things that is lacking is every day. Arthur Reynolds and many other early learning experts have said that children need to have every day preschool to be ready for kindergarten. So many of our programs don't have every day or have half day or partial day or just for 6 weeks they're able to offer these programs. Also qualified teacher, like you mentioned, teacher-child ratios. Those things are the kinds of things that really do provide for a high-quality experience for districts who don't have the extra funding that's given for high poverty to be able to offer these high quality without charging parents fees. So Minnesota was also ranked as having good indicators in our Head Start programs. So I'm happy to see that we were able to invest in Head Start because it is working for our kids. So I hope we can come back to it. I hope that we can strengthen school readiness. We offered a compromise with the School Ready Plus. That was not accepted at this time, and hopefully we can bring this conversation, have good bipartisan agreement in the future.
Senator Bonoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had planned when I raised my hand to ask a specific question, but given the conversation on the table, I do want to just offer an alternative way of looking at it. Because I, really was very pleased with the addition of targeted dollars for the scholarships. As the commissioner knows, that is something that I felt strongly about. And I know that Arthur Reynolds does talk about the need for everyday and many other philosophical viewpoints, and he certainly has the reputation and pedigree to be able to make those comments. But as a mom of 4 kids, I sure know that each of my kids was different, and that model wouldn't have worked for all 4. And so that's why I really appreciate the scholarship approach, so that there are the opportunity for parents to have more choice, so that parents of low income can have the same kinds of choices that all parents have, because I think it is very important for each and every child to have access to high quality care. But my specific question, and again, I wouldn't have even said that, but I just felt as though when we have one view spoken on the record, it's important to also have another alternative spoken. But Commissioner Cassellius, I'm really pleased about the addition of the dollars for the tribal schools, but I haven't been able to understand exactly what happened in that. I know we had this formula whereby if a district had 20 American Indian students, they got a certain amount, $20,000, and then they got, in the previous bill, a pretty low per pupil, and the governor had advocated for much greater per pupil. Could you just explain what happened in the bill as we see before us, and as well with the Bureau of Indian Affairs schools, what happened?
Commissioner.
Senator Cohen, Senator Bonoff. What happened was we went back to the governor's recs for the formula increase, so it went from a grant-making program for our Indian program to a program that provided to 138 districts across Minnesota that had more than 20 Indian students, a base of $20,000 for funding, and then in addition, for every additional Indian student that they had, it would then be 358, I think I'm looking at. 358 per student that they would get to be able to provide additional services around graduation, mentoring, additional tutoring support, that kind of thing for American Indian students in those districts. This was something that was supported by the Minnesota Rural Association, so we were glad. In the language that passed, it was a much smaller amount. It was $63 per additional student, still had the 20,000 student floor, but it also had a provision in there around Title VII. You had to be a Title VII eligible school, which then eliminated 63 districts from being able to get the funding. We felt that because there are American Indian students in so many of our schools in such small numbers, that we wanted to get that out to more of our schools so that they had the opportunity, especially in rural Minnesota, to be able to make a difference for American Indian kids. And it's just a stronger, more expansive program for them to do. Obviously, you can do more with $350 than you can with $63 per kid in terms of providing support. As for the Bureau of Indian Education schools, this was a hard-fought win for us. And for the kids in those schools. Of course, it's just 1,000 kids, but those 1,000 kids in those 4 schools have been tremendously neglected by the federal government, getting about half the funding that every other student in Minnesota gets. So seeing Minnesota stand up and step in when the federal government hasn't quite yet fully funded them at the rate that we're getting for every other Minnesota kid is just a very proud moment for me personally, and I think for every other Minnesotan to say every child matters. When we say all, we mean all. So we raised our equalization cap to now, it was $1,500, and I think it's now $3,230 per student at those schools, so that they will get near the same that every other Minnesota gets to be able to have a really good education. Why does this matter so much? Because they can't recruit great teachers. They can't pay their teachers the same amount. Teachers have turnover in these communities. They don't have money for facilities or computers or science labs or technology or other things that all other kids have. And it's just such it's just such a great thing that they'll be able to have those things. So I'm just very thankful.
And, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bonoff.
Commissioner Cassellius, that's outstanding. That's what I wasn't quite sure exactly what we did, but that's great news, and I want to acknowledge and thank Senator Saxhog for his great work on this, and also to just lay a marker down that perhaps next year we can, if the feds don't come through for that, our bug school, that we can find a way to help those folks have the kind of environment that they need to be able to
Yeah.
really learn.
And Senator, I want to thank you for your advocacy in trying to get them a facility at the bug school. And I know that you worked hard for that, and hopefully we can find a solution to that if the federal government doesn't come through. They shouldn't have to go to those kinds of buildings and go to school in that kind of condition. So just thankful. Also, I should mention, this is not work undone for our Bureau of Indian Education students. It was only one-time money for this biennium. So they'll need that ongoing. So I hope that we'll be able to continue to support our American Indian students at these 4 schools, because they really do deserve it.
And if we look at the achievement gap, these really are the ones who have the greatest gap, so
That's
thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
And Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry.
Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
President Krisha, sorry.
Thank you. And just a couple of comments, if I could. I wanted to go back to the early learning discussion, but I also, if I could add on to what Commissioner Cassellius said, when you look at the education budget, whether it's the Indian education or the special ed, one of the problems we have, of course, is the lack of federal match and the lack of federal participation. And so we need to acknowledge that part of our problem is the limited resources we have when the feds continually don't help us out. And that's one of our struggles. So I am very grateful that we did this, and absolutely the American Indian students represent a large part of the achievement gap, as well as students we work for in other areas. Senator Stephen, I just wanted to respond briefly. I absolutely appreciate your comments and where you're going. But when we look at the early education problem, we have to acknowledge that part of those students are being accounted for. And I think the question is not how many students should be in the classroom, but how many students do we need to take care of to make up the achievement gap closure, as well as how many students do we really need to help. when we look at the research, we know there's a percentage, whether it's 65 to 70%, that are coming to school ready, that are, whether they're doing it through parental involvement or they're going through a private situation, they are getting themselves to that point. And that's great. I look at what people in my community have been able to do in other communities, getting those students ready for kindergarten. It's the other students that we continually have to ask a question of, because of the way you were born or where you were born, how do we help you? Because of the lottery of life, you are in a situation that we should be there assisting you. So one of the things I also want to recognize is when we talk about preschool and early learning, we can get mired down into the specifics of where the dollars go, but the reality is when you look at all these dollars, they flow to the kids. The early learning scholarships through Pathway 2 flow to the schools. The Head Start is helping these students get to the schools. So at the end of the day, what we really have is all the oxen pulling the cart in the same direction. And I think where we get in trouble is when we get program specific. And we say this is the only program that works. The reality is across the board when schools are working through school readiness or we're working through Pathway 2 dollars for Head Start or getting opportunity scholarships and the parents are involved, that's when we see the closure of the achievement gap as well as helping our students get ready for school and kindergarten.
Senator Uyghur?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add that we are at plus 70% now on students ready for K. That's a state statute, actually, in terms of what we're measuring. But we need to have a variety of ways of getting there. And Senator Sieben, on the point for some of the requirements that we had asked for in the Senate bill for readiness, they weren't adopted. I did have very long conversations with Representative Loon about that. Clearly, if you don't have highly qualified personnel, staff that are involved in these early delivery programs, they aren't going to have that high return on investment that everybody praises. So it's important as we go into the future to further examine these standards. Representative Loon has said that we'll have some joint meetings on it. I'm not sure where, but we will. And the good thing, though, is we have a bipartisan effort to close the achievement gap and to make sure students are ready for K, and we're making progress. But for high standards qualifications, that has to be a part of the mix and will be.
Representative Dettmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a brief comment. I know several legislators, bipartisan on the House side, and also Senator Kent and several senators on the Senate side, been working on the physical fitness standards for our state and for our schools, dealing with the obesity problem that we have with population in our schools. So just to let everybody know, we're going to continue working on it. It didn't make it through the conference committee, but we'll continue working on our physical fitness standards. Thank you.
Senator Sieben.
Mr. Chair, just because I feel like some of those comments were directed back at what I originally said, I want to build a little bit on what I said, because I think there's a misnomer out there that if you support public pre-K, that you don't support scholarships. And the governor and the commissioner and Senator Uyghur and leaders on the Senate side have been very transparent about how closing the achievement gap will require a variety of delivery options. That includes Head Start, and that's why I'm glad there's more money for Head Start. It includes additional dollars for scholarships. But as we look forward into the future for what we want for Minnesota and our education system, I strongly believe, and I know that others do in the Senate, I strongly believe that we should provide preschool opportunities for all of Minnesota's children, so that regardless of your income, even if you don't qualify for a scholarship, I know there are families in my district that I hear from who can't afford the tuition that the districts are now charging in South Washington County to send their kids to pre-K. And they want to send their kids to a preschool, but they can't afford to. So just like how we used to only fund half day of kindergarten and always come up with excuses about why the state couldn't find the money to come up with that funding, I think this is something we need to work for in the future. And if families want to choose to send their child to a private preschool provider or want to send their kid to a daycare that also has a preschool option, you know, that would be something that's certainly worthy of debate and that we can continue to discuss. But I think that we're doing a disservice to the people of Minnesota and to middle-income families to assume that every family can afford to send their child to preschool at this point right now. That's not certainly the case, and that's why I think we need to continue to work for universal pre-K.
Commissioner, if I can ask a couple of questions. I note in looking at the chart that lists special session and the conference committee, it would appear that the starting point for the negotiations on behalf of the administration was the conference committee report. It doesn't look like anything was dropped from the conference committee report. Is that correct, in terms of appropriations?
That's correct, Senator.
So everything is an add-on from where we left off at the end of the session. Second question I had, just, I probably should know this, but with the English learners, does that fully fund the additional grade? Because I thought it was a somewhat more expensive proposition.
Senator Cohen, it doesn't give additional grade. What it does is give an additional year of support to students. So right
Okay.
now, we went from 5 years of support previously when we first came on to 6 years, and now 7 years of support. Oh, and Tom's clarifying too that it doesn't start till FY17.
Oh,
So
okay.
it won't be
I couldn't-
next year, it will start in FY17. That might be why the number looks
All right,
smaller.
that explains it then.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pappas?
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on something that was said about nothing that was in both bills was dropped in the special session report, and I just want you to, maybe the staff can help find where this is then, just for the audience sake, because I see the Children's Museum, 226, the Duluth Children's Museum, 227, the Academy of Science, 228, and then there was a 52 Success for the Future that, I actually don't know what that is, but whatever those are, they were funded in, I believe they were funded in both the House and Senate. Someone can clarify me if I'm wrong, and then they were not funded in the special session report, so maybe they're somewhere else.
Commissioner?
Senator, I can't speak to the other items of the Children's Museum, maybe fiscal staff can, but to the Success for the Future, what we did was shift that program, hold them harmless who were in the current program, and put them in the new formula program.
Can anybody respond to Senator?
Mr. Chair, the museums
Senator
are
Uyghur.
rolled into Article 2.
Senator Pappas?
Well, I don't know what you mean by Article 2. Do you have it on the spreadsheet where the line item is?
Mr. Willms,
Mr. Chair and Senator Pappas, for greater, I guess, ease in putting together the agency budget at the end of the year, staff suggested rolling the museum and education center appropriations into the education excellence category. That's in Article 2. And so you'll see a line item in there called museums and education centers, and those contain the Academy of Science and Children's Museum.
Thank you.
Senator Stump?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is on a different subject. Senator Chamberlain in the Senate, and I'm not sure who the House author was, had some legislation that dealt with dyslexia. And this might be a question for the commissioner. Is there currently any program that helps schools with that particular disability? And when I asked a little bit about that, they said that it was not picked up under special ed. And so I'm wondering if there's any, how do districts respond to that predicament or disability that students have?
Mr. Chair, Senator Stump, there were some changes to our literacy plans in the policy, I think, that advocates brought forward. As I was reading the bill last night, I noticed in the original bill, it wasn't during the conference committee time, it was in the original bill, that there was some language to strengthen some of the components for district literacy plans. That is included in the original bill. And in terms of the technical support, we provide technical support for literacy through our regional centers of excellence in our highest priority schools. And also, we have a literacy specialist on staff who works with advocates and also with school districts. But obviously, we could do so much more in this area of supporting students with dyslexia within our schools and work with our advocates in order to do that. but there was some changes specifically, I think advocates brought forward with the district literacy plans that were made in the original bill.
Thank you.
Other questions from committee members, discussion? Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Senator Cohen. I'm wondering if someone could answer the question about what type of additional property tax liability that we're putting forward to the property taxpayers in the school districts across the state with this addition of the long-term facilities maintenance category, and maybe also correspondingly how much equalization aid is attached to that coming from the state budget.
Okay, who is volunteering?
Mr. Chair, we're going to have nonpartisan research.
So, Mr. Arneson?
Mr. Chair and members, Bjorn Arneson with Nonpartisan Senate Research. So if you look at the Senate tracking sheet marked Property Tax Tracking Special Session Agreement, the facilities proposal, you probably know, combines a few streams of existing school district revenues that are available to districts for maintaining their facilities. These are generally equalized levy programs. The new program is titled Long-Term Facilities Maintenance in Fund 1. That's marked at line 41 of the property tax tracking sheet. The elimination of the other programs that are rolled into that program are displayed as, of course, negative numbers on the tracking sheet. The long-term effects will be revenue increases for the districts that are not currently eligible for alternative facilities revenues. The long-term facilities maintenance program is a relatively strongly equalized levy program, but to be sure, for a district that will be receiving increased revenue to maintain facilities under this program, that district will see local property tax increases as well as increases in state equalized aid.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that was a good start at answering the question. I'm not even sure which spreadsheet we're on. I've got 3 sheets in front of me. Both of them appear to be house sheets. I've got the property tax tracking sheet, and then I've got the House Education Finance Committee sheet, and I've got a one-side 8.5 by 11 E through 12 special session agreement sheet. And were you working off of the property tax one? And I don't see a line 41 on there.
Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the Senate sheet. I'm not sure that I have the House levy tracking sheet in front of me, but if I did, I could certainly make line item reference to that. That's the appropriations tracking.
Does everybody understand what we have? We've got 3 tracking sheets.
I've been told that it's line 47 on the sheet we have, Mr. Chair. I've got it here. So I would ask, Mr. Chair, so we look at line 47. Are we looking at, I see 173 million, and I see 204 million, I see 232 million for apparently different years. Can you tell us what that means for the biennium? How much additional property tax liability we can see the taxpayers of Minnesota see because of this additional item that hasn't been part of our education policy prior to this proposal?
Mr. Arneson.
Mr. Chair, members, so I'll tell you which line items we should sort of net together in each year to arrive at that total and do a little thumbnail math here to help members understand the impact. So in column D, that is pay 16 levies. Line 47, as Representative Drazkowski indicated, is the long-term facilities maintenance. That's 173.5 increases. So then we subtract off the programs that are rolled into that program. So that would include health and safety at line 48, the health and safety at line 49, the alt facilities at line 51, and the deferred maintenance at line 57. And all told, by my math, in fiscal 17, that's roughly net zero, very close. In fiscal 18 and 19, the net levy as a result of implementing this program does increase in the facilities maintenance levies. Those levies in the remainder of the bill are offset with reductions in the student achievement levy and in increased operating capital levy equalization inside general education. So that over the tracking period, the levy changes in the bill are net zero at a state level. But as I mentioned earlier, for districts that are receiving new revenues in the deferred maintenance, in the new deferred maintenance program, local levies in those districts will increase in some cases and decreases in other cases, depending on the local property tax wealth in those districts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Uyghur.
I just wanted to add, I believe I heard in part of the question that this might be a new overall program. It's new to the extent that now we level the playing field for the other districts. Right now, only 25 districts had the opportunity to participate in the alt facilities program. And it created a great inequality for funding school facilities, particularly in rural Minnesota. This was the #1 priority of the Minnesota Rural Education, Students' Equity in Education, a number of other groups. And so I just wanted you to know both that it had strong support.
Okay, do members have any other questions or discussion on the proposed Senator Westrom?
Mr. Chair, maybe Commissioner Cassellius, are we doing anything to help the agriculture levy, and maybe Chairman Uyghur or one of the other authors could help us in ag-rich districts? There's been a lot of discussion, but is there any relief that would go that direction with an equalization or some sort of a reduced formula on ag land that's seen a real high valuation in recent years and picks up probably a more significant portion than once was anticipated when we've set these formulas in place? Anything we're doing to help that issue that's out there?
I'm not sure who's going to answer. Was it Mr. Arneson? Were you going to?
Mr. Chair and Senator Westrom, the long-term facilities maintenance program that I just mentioned does include a special calculation of adjusted net tax capacity for the purposes of calculating the equalization within that program. So as you know, ANTC is the tax base that underlies a great many of the education equalized levies in the statutes. For the purposes of the long-term facilities maintenance program only, a district's ANTC is calculated less the 50% of the value of Class 2A ag land. So the kind of thumbnail effect of that is that in a district that in which a great proportion of the taxable value is Class 2A, that district's ANTC will look smaller relative to the state average ANTC, and as a result of that, that district will be more likely to receive a portion of their long-term facilities maintenance revenues in the form of state aid. The alternate calculation pulls about, I think it's about 3 dozen districts back onto the equalization formula. So that whereas formerly they would have paid those revenues, or received those revenues all from property tax, with the alternate calculation, about 3 dozen of them receive at least a portion of equalized aid under the alternate calculation.
Mr. Chair, Can you clarify that number 3,000? I didn't think we had even 3,000 school districts in the state.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I meant to say 3 dozen, and I apologize if I used the wrong units there. 3 dozen.
Say that again? 3 dozen?
Dozen.
Oh, dozen, not 3,000, okay. So, Mr. Chair, you indicated the formula would be cut in half, or 50% of the value would be counted towards the formula. Is that also how they'll be taxed, or is it just for generating a more of a balanced approach with what they qualify for aid?
Mr. Chair and Senator Westrom, the tax would be spread in the same way. So the tax wouldn't be discounted by 50% as applied to the Class 2A land. The alternate calculation is only for the purposes of calculating the equalization mix. So let's say that the total tax under the alternate calculation was 80,000 in levy and 20,000 in aid. That 80,000 in levy would be spread in the same way that it always has been on NTC.
Last question, Mr. Chair, then what about new school buildings? Would this be a similar calculation when they go towards a new school, or is it just for improvements and maintenance issues? And is it prospective or retroactive and prospective?
Mr. Chair and Senator Westrom, the alternate calculation would apply only to the equalized levy within the long-term facilities maintenance program, not for debt service revenues for new building bonds, for example. And the alternate the effective date on the provision is fiscal year 17, so it would be for taxes beginning payable 16.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that there was nothing in the special session agreement regarding school facilities. It is what we had originally voted on.
Senator Bonoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Uyghur, it was brought to my attention that the language in the bill perhaps does not fix that issue for the early learning students who would like to attend the deaf school. As I understand it, according to what I've heard, that that fix, which I recall we all said in our committee that for sure we were going to take care of that, where those students really have no other place to go if they sign. And apparently somehow that didn't get into the bill. Could you address that?
Well, Mr. Chair, Senator Bonoff, I've been trying until 5 minutes before this hearing to see if we could get that provision in. I thought it would be, and I would yield to the Commissioner, Representative Krisha, if there's still a possibility for that. I know we're not taking any action, but clearly the Senate had wanted to include this.
And just a question then first. Senator Uyghur, was that not in the conference report? Did it not get in the final bill?
No, Mr. Chair, Senator Bonoff, it's not in the final bill.
The conference report that we
Right.
voted on?
Correct.
Okay. So I would ask the Commissioner and Representative to address that, because, I mean, that was something we just felt, we just couldn't believe. I remember when we heard that these kids have literally no other place to attend school than that.
Any further comments on that? But other questions?
Mr. Chair, I asked the Commissioner if she...
I'm sorry. Commissioner, did you have a response?
No, it was not included in the final bill, and hopefully that it could get resolved.
Commissioner, I understand it's $30,000?
Yeah.
So I would ask, and we don't have the bill before us, so perhaps there's still time, but I would ask that to be considered.
Right, but it's not officially before us.
Again, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Cassellius. The governor had proposed a reduction of, I think, 7 tests. what is the status of test reduction in this bill?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, if you're asking me, Mr. Urdahl, it's still what was in the original bill that you proposed, and the governor's recommendations were not taken. However, they did limit local testing to 10 hours for, I think it's elementary students, and 11 hours for district and school-wide assessments for secondary students. That does not include AP and IB tests, but that's what was passed in the original conference committee report.
Okay, further questions? Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, I know that Senator Westrom was asking about the situation with farmers and their property taxes. And as I understand it, maybe council can correct me if I am wrong here, but in this alternative long-term facilities maintenance money, the state is going to be sending some equalization money to school districts. So the schools, and especially as was pointed out in the agricultural areas of the state and in areas that are not currently participating in this or don't have, I should say, authorization or authority to do this, are going to receive the bulk of this money. And so the schools in those areas are going to receive money. And in return, Senator Westrom, the property taxpayers are going to get to pay more. And so there isn't money going from the state to offset the property taxes of those property taxpayers, as I understand it. But rather, we do have bills both in the House and in the Senate sitting in the Tax Conference Committee to provide significant property tax relief to rural Minnesota, to farmers and other landowners of Class 2A, 2B, and 2C land, sitting in the Tax Conference Committee, waiting for this legislature to act to provide that property tax relief. So, Mr. Chair, just to make it real clear, as I understand it, and again, I can be corrected by counsel if I am incorrect, there is not any part of this bill that provides money that would go to provide or offset property tax liability for farmers, but rather a commitment or a liability likely in those districts to increase their property taxes.
Are there further questions or comments from committee members relative to the education bill? Commissioner, let me just ask, at the outset, you offered some introductory comments, and I recognize you can't speak for every school district in the state and what they're going to do, but obviously a lot of discussion as we've ramped up the size of this bill in terms of meeting district needs, particularly as school districts try to catch up to, coming out of the recession and what was happening with school financing, whether at a property tax level or a state level. I mean, is your sense that the formula increase presented in this bill should go a long way toward, if not holding school districts harmless from a state perspective, from what you know be of great benefit? Again, you comment on that at the outset, but maybe get a little bit more detail from you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Senator Cohen, thank you so much for that. I will comment on that. I just want to briefly address Senator Bonoff, just so people know that we did bring up the $35,000 that needs to be there, and it was my understanding when we left the table that leadership was going to talk about it, so I sure hope that that does get resolved. I just haven't been able to connect with leadership since then, but with $1 billion on the bottom line, it seems we should be able to find $35,000. Secondly, I do think that there's a lot of superintendents out there who will now feel that this is a breath of fresh air, that this bill does give them what they need to not only pay the bills, but also to start to address some of those nagging gaps with American Indian kids, our kids who do not yet speak English or are new to country. Get a good start on early learning programs, whether it's through school readiness or scholarships. Yes, the governor has supported all of those mixed delivery systems for promoting more kids coming ready for kindergarten, added to doing already all-day kindergarten with the 2013 legislature. So I do think we're making progress. We are also making progress with our equitable funding between small schools, rural schools, metro schools, as over these past 4 years, we've gone from 31% disparity between our highest 5% of revenue earning districts and our lowest 5% of earning revenue districts to 18%. That's true progress to bring down those disparities, and I think that these dollars will help with that equitable distribution, and hopefully we can continue to move forward with that. Some of the facilities things will help some of our districts with deferred maintenance expenses as well. So altogether, a better bill because of the session. We were able to get 525 with the 2%. We were able to focus on the poor kids who were left off the table. And so I'm just so thankful that we have a bipartisan agreement that's going to help schools move forward. So thank you very much for all of your hard work on this bill.
Other questions? The authors wish any final comments? I don't see anybody else at the table who has questions or concerns. Okay, thank you. Well, if there's nothing else on this bill, I'll turn the chair over to Representative Knobloch for our next bill.